typhoons. Different times, of course, different areas. And I think this would be a good story because there's a gentleman that Kathy and I recently found him over in Hemet, California, which is like 35 miles from Redlands. I never heard of the guy, and we subscribed at that time for the Riverside newspaper, Press Enterprise, and I was flipping through there, and it said new books on the market, new author, new books, and it was just like jumped off the page. It said, man writes a book on the typhoon that hit Okinawa in 1945. Well, I was in two of them in Okinawa, off Okinawa, in 1945. So I got interested in this guy and his book. And of course, he didn't give his address, but he was selling books. I thought, oh, that's strange. But he did give an address of a library, or actually it was like a bookstore in the Hemet Library. And so he was selling his book, I think for $18 or $19. I forget how much it was.
Oh, I like your socks.
And I said, man, I got to have that book because I hadn't seen nothing in print with like a book form about this typhoon.
Yeah.
I like it.
And it affected thousands of people. I mean thousands.
Thank you.
So I'm going to bring you up a little data on this typhoon. And so explaining what a typhoon is like a hurricane or a cyclone.
Wow.
Now, if you're in the China Sea, or in the Western Pacific, or in the Central Pacific, anything over 60 knots per hour can be considered a typhoon. Now, if you were in the East Coast, and you got the same type of velocity on the current, the wind and so forth, you'd call it a hurricane. They're all the same, but different names. And so a typhoon, now maybe an error on this, but I believe they go counterclockwise.
Huh.
Counter, backwards on the clock. And a hurricane goes the other way. It's all based on the rotation of the Earth and how it spins on its axis.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it gets real complicated. But a hurricane goes in the other direction. In other words, just going counterclockwise. And a cyclone is the same thing, but you won't. Now, we have cyclones in the Midwest, and they turn into tornadoes and all kinds of crazy stuff. But Australia and down in the South Pacific call them cyclones. But basically, they're all the same, but different breed of cat. One's going this way and one's going that. Now, I'm going to bring you up to par here on this. We were in Okinawa, which is a portion of Japan, of course, and it was the last island that the U.S. Army and Navy and Marines invaded in 1945. April Fool's Day on April 1, 1945, they stormed ashore and took this island. About 31 days later, they had it.
Wow.
And of course, many people died. Of course, thousands died to take this island. And the Japanese put up a pretty good scrap because they knew we were on their territory, and we were just 300 miles from Tokyo. So that's how the war was coming down to an end. And so I was in the United States Navy, and they shipped us. Now, why they shipped us up to Okinawa, I'll never know. Because the war ended on August the 14th, 1945. Well, that was the best birthday present I ever had.
Say on your
It was my
birthday?
birthday.
Oh, wow.
And I think that was my 19th birthday. So the war ended. Now, we were about 1,500 miles from Okinawa when the war ended, in an island called Saipan. It's down in the Mariana Group. It's near Guam, about 125 miles from Guam. Most people know where Guam is on a map. It's one of our territories out in the Pacific. We got an air base there, and it's I think it's a protectorate, kind of like Puerto Rico is to the United States.
Uh-huh.
The Guam is one of our territories,
Mm-hmm.
not a state, but they do have, I believe, one or two representatives from Guam that can sit in the House of Representatives in Washington. So we were about 125 miles from this place. And the war ended on my birthday, which was August 14th, 1945. And so now then, after the war ended, they decided to take our ship, which had gone through all kinds of different maneuvers and battles and invasions, and it wasn't in too good a shape because it buffeted many typhoons.
Mm-hmm.
Beside these, it was going to get involved in shortly. And this was a gunboat. I was on two different ships, but this gunboat was called an LCI, had Landing Craft Infantry. And what they would do, they could go right into the beach, and they had extended, we called them staircases, they could extend walkways out of the ship after they got into the beach, and just like an arm would come out, and they'd walk down these stairs right into the beach.
Mm-hmm.
So we could get soldiers or Marines right into the beach without them having to swim and maybe get drowned. Now this ship was a very small ship. They built them strictly for one operation, and that was prior to the Normandy invasion in 1944. So this ship was such a good ship for what they didn't really know how they would react and how we could transport people, and so they did a lot of experimenting and so forth, and they worked out all the bugs, and they built them and sent them over to England, and they'd send them in convoys, and they were pretty safe to. They couldn't. The Germans couldn't sink them with submarines because their submarines would go right under them. In other words, submarine has to go about, I think it's either 12 or 15 feet underwater.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our draft is 6 feet. So if they shot at this convoy of these LCIs, they'd never hit them because all of them would just go right underneath them.
Huh.
And I guess there's ways to do it, but they didn't bother to knock them out. So these ships were very vital for the invasion of the Normandy beachhead in 1944. And so what they did, they didn't even have a compass. They had no electronic equipment. And they had to follow another mother ship, like from London, England, down to the Normandy beach in France was about, 100 and maybe 150 miles at the most. So they had to follow the mother ship that had compasses and gyroscopes and all kinds of stuff. And so they'd have to follow him. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, he was lost out there.
Yeah.
And so they were such a success that the Navy said, we're going to build more of these ships. They built, I don't know, maybe 600 at that time. And it was a very small ship. I think it right now might be a little off in the era here, but the ship was about 158 feet long. That's from the stern to the bow. And it was about 28 feet wide. I'm just estimating now. And it only carried a draft of about 6 feet down, loaded. So it had a flat bottom, so we could hit the beach. Then they discharge all the cargo, all the soldiers, sailors, whatever they were, Marines. Then they would put it in reverse and back off the sandbars and get back in the ocean, or they're already in the ocean, but it didn't take much water to get them off. So that ship, unfortunately for me and about 13 more sailors, we got taken off of our beautiful transport ship that I wish I had a picture. I just found a new picture that I got on the War Hawk. That's my first ship I was on. And it was built in Oakland, California by McCormick Shipbuilding. And it was built and commissioned in 1944. I have a picture from the Pentagon that they took of that ship. And when I got out of the Navy, I wrote the Pentagon, and they sent me a picture of my ship. And it's a pretty good sized ship. We had 300 and I believe it was 335 crew members. That included the officers. But that was enlisted people and the officers. And then we could carry about 1,800 fully equipped Army or Marines or whatever we wanted to carry. And they loaded them up, and we went all the way to Saipan or where we were going to go on the invasion. But anyway, making a long story short, we was in about, I think I was in about 4 invasions: Saipan, Tinian, Guam, the Philippines, twice in the Philippines, Leyte Gulf, and Lingayen Gulf. And then when we were in Lingayen Gulf on January the 9th, 1945, on this first ship I was on, USS War Hawk, a kamikaze boat. These people is fighting today in Iraq and Iran and all these different places. Suicide has been going on for years. The Japanese, they probably polished it up to science. They were giving their lives, and the kamikazes were the air boys that flew the planes. The kamikazes, where they get that. But they had suicide bombers in boats that go out in among the fleet at night and crash into the boats, or the ships. I shouldn't say boats, but ships. And our ship got hit in the morning of January the 10th, 1945. This is the USS War Hawk. And what he did, he tried to hit the engine room. The engine room was right in the middle of the ship. So he come in, nobody could really know. It was dark, night, early in the morning, about 5 minutes after 4 in the morning. And all the troops that was on that ship was 1,800. They had 1,800 soldiers.
Judy, it's probably picking that up, yeah.
So they had 1,800 soldiers, had not disembarked to go in and land on the beaches. And I was a boat coxswain running a 36 passenger, I guess you'd call them passengers or personnel, fully loaded Marines or Army that could get in this boat. They were Higgins boats. I don't know if you've ever heard of a Higgins boat. They were probably one of the best, well, I've been told, and I read the articles just recently, it was one of the most, probably one of the most important vehicles, or if you want to call a boat a vehicle, that they ever come out of the war was the Higgins boat. They had one big, great Marine engine in it, and they could put 36 fully equipped Marines in it and head for the beach. And it was flat bottom, and you could just shove it right into the beach. They could drop a ramp, and they'd just scatter like the scared sheep into the jungles. Boom, it'd been the jungle, see? So you raise your ramp up and back off you go. Go back, get another load. Well, anyway, we had got into Lingayen Gulf on the 9th day of January 1945, and we got hit on the 10th at 4 in the morning, about 4 or 5 to be exact. And this suicide boat hit us. He was trying, say that was the engine room. So he hit the bulkhead on the outside of the ship, right where the engine room is or was, and it didn't go off. Whatever he was.
The bomb didn't go off?
No, it didn't go off. They think it might have been a torpedo that he had strapped. He was in a he was in an outrigger, an old outrigger boat, and like you'd see in the islands, you know, like the Hawaiians have the old outriggers. And so he couldn't get up enough, I guess, speed or whatever he took. So he backed off, and he hit us again. Now these testimonies came from an officer that was on duty he had the 12 to 4 watch, so he was still on watch. And he heard this bumping, and better take a look. So they had one of these, what they call battle lanterns, big flashlight type thing. They worked off of batteries, you know. And he shined it down, and he could see this boat. And so all he could see was this one Japanese guy with a helmet on and this big outrigger coming towards the ship again. So he pulls out his 45 and is going to blast him because he knew that that's what had hit him twice and hadn't gone off. And so this time he started in, and the officer took a shot at him, but he missed him. Yeah. Well, you know, the boat coming in this dark and,
Yeah.
you know, light trying to, you know, so he missed him. If it had shot him and got him 50 feet away, why, we might have been safe. And this time he missed the engine room by about 8 feet. And he hit a portion of the ship where there was 300 soldiers billeted or bunked in that particular hole. They had canvas bunks probably the ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he hit there, he went off. I mean, it went off. And so it knocked a hole in our ship. You could have drove a Greyhound bus through it.
Were all those men killed?
A great number of them were killed, yes. And I said the 300. It might not have been that exact number, but some of them had been taken off the first day we got there. But I think there might have been at least 100 in there because we found. Finally, when I say we, the whole crew, they asked for volunteers to go down and clean that hole up. I mean, you had to go in there and get the bodies out.
Oh, man.
And so they couldn't make it go down, but they asked for volunteers. So back in those days, I think I had more guts than I had brains. So I said, I'll go. I'll be one of the crew to clean this thing up.
Yeah.
And so they selected 120 people, and they were going to do it in squads of 20. And they was going to take you down there for 15 or 20 minutes. And they knew they didn't think you could take it any longer than that. So I was on the first. I said, I want to go down, be the first to go down there with the group. And we did. It took 20 of us went down.
Was it maybe just a morbid curiosity? Or
yeah,
what?
I think it was. Just, you know, war is crazy, you know.
Yeah.
And I'd seen a lot of dead Japanese on the beaches and a lot of dead Marines, but I never seen anything like this. I just wanted to see. Now it's strange that I wanted to see this.
Yeah.
Because I was sleeping in a bunk exactly like these Army guys were, and that could have happened to us.
Yeah.
See? But anyway, I said, I want to go down. And so they took 19 and me, 20 of us total. And we got down there and started cleaning that hole out, and we found 63 bodies. That's how many. They would take a bunk and they'd lay them down on the deck and they'd bring a body over. A lot of them didn't have any limbs. They had blown them to bits, you know. We tried to assemble one person to a bunk, and then they sent this big cable down and they just hook it on and they'd pull them up. They had a big hole they'd pull out of. Anyway, it was something else to witness. And they'd take these bodies and they'd raise them all the way up to the top of the deck. And they had doctors up there. And they'd open their mouths if they still had their head on. Some of them didn't have any heads, so we'd try to put a head on somebody, make a body up. And they'd open their mouths and they'd pull the teeth out to identify them. That's why they identified by their teeth, dental marks.
Did they have tags too?
Yeah, but some of them had blown completely off.
Yeah.
Didn't do any good. And but anyway, long story short, we got 63 men out of that hole. And they didn't need the 120 men because the first 20 got them all out. And I thought that was a pretty good record. They kept us down about 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But it was unreal. So anyway, that was the USS War Hawk. And then
Did you know a lot of those guys?
No, we didn't. Fortunately, we didn't know. Well, I did say no. We lost 3 sailors and 60 Army guys. The 3 sailors were sitting in the chow hall. They call it chow hall, where you get your food, you know. They call it chow hall. They were sitting in there, and when he hit, it blew the bulkheads apart. And even the 3 sailors, one of them was a cook. He was cooking with the troops to feed them, and it happened at 5 minutes after 4. And the other two guys were drinking coffee just like we are here or whatever
Wow.
at 5 after 4 in the morning. Now, what is so strange about this story is had I been there on the 12 to 4 watch, I'd have been down in the galley because we always went down and had a cup of coffee before they would go down and sleep in the below the decks. Well, fortunately, I was in my boat off the ship. And in fact, I had taken a bunch of soldiers into the invasion, and I couldn't get back to my ship, couldn't find my ship. It was not anchored where I thought it was, so I couldn't get it, I couldn't find it. Hundreds of ships, hundreds. And so I waited till it got light, and I had my boat, my amphibious Higgins boat. So we started back to the ship, and it was listing bad, it's like it's gonna sink. I said, holy moly, what happened? And they said, we got hit by the kamikaze last night. And I said, oh my God, if I'd have been aboard,
Wow.
I'd have probably been right in that galley having a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
So I wasn't there.
Wow.
So they killed 3 sailors off our ship, and the rest of them were soldiers. Terrible. Well, that knocked us out of the war completely. So they shipped us back down to New Guinea, which was about 1,500 miles from where it got hit. And they put us in dry dock and raised us completely out of water. They had one of them big marine dry docks. You could sink it down and the ship could run up, and then they'd pump the water out, and up comes the ship. So they patched that hole, got these guys out, and they put a temporary patch on the side, and then we headed for San Francisco, back to the Golden Gate. Took us, I don't know, we couldn't go very fast, about 14, 15 knots, which is like 20 miles an hour. But we got back, and they put that ship back in the dry dock, or shipyard over in Oakland. And they rebuilt it. What they did, they just cut that ship in 3 pieces. Everything forward of the bridge, they cut that and just moved it away and took that whole section out. And then they fabricated the section they needed. Kaiser used to have a big shipbuilding place in Oakland, or not Oakland, Richmond. So they went up there and got all the parts and floated it down on a big barge and put it in Oakland where they had their shipbuilding place. And they floated right in there and then just started tackling it where they could hold it together, and then they welded it together. Better than just build it piece by piece. So didn't take long to do it.
Yeah.
I think about 30 days. So anyway, I got to leave and come home and Redlands, and that story will not go into the next story that follows.
Okay.
But what I want to tell you quickly. After 30 days, I had 30-day leave, and I come to Redlands and stayed with my folks, of course. And excuse me,
Some water.
let me have a drink real quick. And so then we came back to Honolulu, and we landed at Aloha Tower in Honolulu, fully not knowing that we was going to be discharged from that ship. But the war, they knew the war was just about ready to end. Of course, they didn't tell us that. And so they got all the other amphibious crew, which I was one of them, 60 of us, and said, well, fellas, we appreciate all your duties and your service you've done, but we are now going to redesign this ship for a different mission. And they had no more use for our boats anymore. We trained to be amphibious boatmen, and now we're out of that job.
Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, they took 60 of us off the ship, and they put us in just trucks in Honolulu, and they took us all the way down to Pearl Harbor, which was like 7 miles. And then they turned and went up what they call Waipio Point. That's way up in near Pearl Harbor. and they had a camp up there. Navy had an amphibious force school. So they said, well, here's your new home. And I said, holy mackerel, they're living in tents. Tents. And you can say what you want to about Hawaii. It's a beautiful place. But that wasn't a beautiful place at all. It was hot and sandy and the wind blew and it was just absolutely blow you away. And we got stuck there. I said, I can't take this. And with your own ship, you got a comfortable bed and it's clean and you get 3 square meals a day and, good life.
Yeah.
And to be put in a tent, too much. So we were there 30 days in this tent. And they said, we don't know how, what thousands of people there, they had sailors running out their ears. They didn't know what to do with them. And they just kept recruiting them and sending them over to Hawaii, and there they were living in tents. So I got real upset about it. Not only me, but about 15 of us decided, we want to get off that island. I went down, I said, let's get off this island. The guy said, how are you going to do it? I said, we're going to take a walk. And we were about 3 miles from the harbor where the Arizona is setting today and other ships. And so we started walking. And here comes this Navy guy in an old big 2-ton truck, and he says, where you guys going? We said, we're going down to see if we can get off this island. He said, well, good luck. But you want to ride down there? I said, it's about a mile. I said, sure. So we got in this truck. There was 13. I coaxed 13 to go with me. The other 2 said, no, we'll stay here. So go down there to see this, well, it was a Quonset hut. You know what a Quonset hut is? It's around, they had the offices made out of steel, but they call them Quonset huts. It's kind of like a rounded building. So we walked in there and it had a big sign on the door said, the greatest sailors in the world walk through these doors. Oh, little propaganda, of course. So I went in through that door and here was this great, huge, humongous chief. I bet he weighed 350 pounds. I don't know how he stayed in the Navy by being overweight. But he had a desk job, so they didn't worry about him. He was a Mexican guy. And of course we didn't have but one Mexican aboard our ship. One. And he was my friend for this day.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll go see him ever down in Texas. So anyway, he wasn't one of the 13 that went down to get on the ship. He was already on this ship, this Cape Chopper. So went in this big Quonset hut, and here's this great big gringo, or not a gringo. He's a big Gordo, I called him. Yeah, Gordo. There he's sitting up there, All right, what are you blankety blank called dirty names? What are you sailor doing here? We're down here, Chief, to get off this island. He says, get off of this island? It's the most beautiful island in the whole Pacific. Give me a break. I said, no, living over in a tent? No way. He said, get out of my office. I said, we ain't got no way. You know no ships out here to take you guys. And I said, okay, guess I'll have to go back. So we get back outside, and we started walking back up to which was about 3 miles. And here comes the same truck that took us down there. He says, you guys didn't get in on it, didn't get very far, did you? I said, no, we didn't. He said, well, tell you what, why don't you go back and try it one more time? You might be successful. So I'll be back and pick you guys up and take you back to your tent if you want me to. But I said, no, I'd like to go back in there one more time and talk to this guy. So I'll go back in there. He said, oh, and they let out some profanity. He says, what the hell are you guys back for? Get out of here. I said, hang on, Chief, got to talk to you. What do you want to talk about? I want to get off this island, and there's 13 of us. He said, I told you there's no ship available. Now get the hell out of my office.
Yeah.
So he said, no, wait. I said, wait a minute. Now here's where persuasion comes in. Sometimes you need to keep persuading people. I said, you haven't heard my story. I don't want to hear your story. And so I said, you mean to tell me there's 50 or 60 ships down there and we can't find one ship to take us?
Yeah.
No. Well, he just wasn't updated at the present, so they was always taking sailors off that beach and taking them, you know. So I said, tell you what, I'll make you a deal. Deal? We don't make deals. I said, you've got 13 fine American sailors here. We will serve on any kind of ship you've got that's going to sea. He said, really? I said, uh-oh. Something wrong with that. He says, hang on, I might just have something for you guys. I thought, oh my God, what am I into now? So he says, where's your gear? And I said, my gear? He said, yeah. I said, we left it in our tent up there. He said, well, go back out on the street, get that truck, take you up there and get your sea bags and get back down here, and I'm going to sign you to a ship. Boy, wow, can't beat that. So, little did I know. So, we got our gear and put it back in this big 2-ton truck, and off we go back down there again. And he kept going. This guy said, I'll take you down to your ship. Man, we was passing battleships, cruisers, big, nice warships, you know.
Yeah.
Aircraft carriers. And I said, holy Columbus, where we're going? And I couldn't see anybody's ships. And he went right down to the end of the dock. And here was this rusty, beat up, unbelievable ship. It looked like it'd been sunk and resurrected out of the ocean. It was just rust all over it. And they was out there sandblasting it, and you know, well, they were working on it. Putting in new rockets. It made a rocket ship out of this particular boat. They call it a boat. And it was a gunboat. So they took one of these LCIs that was so famous in the invasion of Europe. They took that and decided they could use them in the Pacific because they were sea-going boogers. I mean, they were a nice little ship. And duty was just perfect because, you know, you had 6 officers and 60 enlisted people. They didn't have no regulation. They didn't have to, you didn't have to go out every Monday morning and have your shoes shine and all that stuff. It was kind of like, I don't know if you ever heard about the McHale's Navy. Had a TV series after the war called McHale's Navy. Mm-hmm. They did every crazy thing that ever happened, you know. Of course, this was Hollywood coming. But it was pretty true. We had no regulations, and we didn't have to stand watches. And we had duties, but we didn't have all the authority that went with it. They just trusted you, hey, go do this, and we do it. Anyway, there was this ship. It looked like it had been dredged right out of the bottom of the ocean. And found out later it had been up in Alaska, up in the Aleutians. That's why it's all rusty and beat up. So they wanted to take that ship and turn it into a rocket ship. We had little rockets. These rockets were about, maybe 12 inches long. They looked like miniature bombs. Mm-hmm. Had a little fin on the back. And they put them in a cage, they just rack them up like a stack of wood, and it's all electronically. When they'd fire them, they'd all go at once. And they had no way to guide them. This was they'd go up about 3,000 feet, and then they'd had a little fin, it's like a little bomb. Mm-hmm. Then they'd come down to the earth, and then I thought, what's this for? And they said, well, we knocking out Japanese pillboxes with them. It was pretty good to do things like that, you know. And we found out later we were doing more damage with those little rockets than we're doing good. Because the Marines would land the Marines, you know, and then they'd go over there and bomb the beaches, and they'd had their communication lines strung through the palm trees and was cutting down their palm trees and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So they finally ordered us off of don't come in here anymore. So we quit doing that. And so finally we found out if there was no Marines around, we could blast up, you know. We thought we'd get a few Japanese that way. Anyway, but what we really were doing for the war effort, we were knocking a hole in the sand, which made good foxholes. Because when they got there, they could jump in these sand traps, I guess you'd call them. It was just like a big plate, you know. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that ship was painted, all new engines put on it, new radar, new rocketry. Oh man, when they got through, it was like Uno first class. And so here I get off my sea bag, and it was a low ship. It wasn't way up high. You had to take the gangplank up. So the gangplank was flat with the dock. You could just walk right across from the gangplank, and there'd be a ship. It was way down low in the water. And so I said, well, I guess that's it, boys. And there's 13 of us. So I led the pack and crossed over this gangplank, and there's an old chief. Now, the chiefs, they run the Navy in World War II. And I mean, they knew what they called them lifers. If you put 20 years in, he was a lifer, in for life. That's why they called them lifers. Mm-hmm. So this old chief, he was pretty close to having his 20 years in. He probably screwed up somewhere, and they put him on this ship. If they wanted to get rid of some guys off of the big capital ships, they'd put them down on these other ships to get them out of their hair, I might be an alcoholic or whatever. So first we come across this gangplank. Well, the custom is when you come aboard a ship, you've got to address the officer and ask him permission to come aboard. That's the way it goes. Mm-hmm. So I saluted him and I said, "Permission to come aboard, Chief." He said, "What the hell are you saluting me? I don't deserve a salute. I'm a chief." I don't see any officers around here. You're the only officers. I'm asking permission to come aboard. Forget that Navy stuff. I said, hey, he blew my doors off. I said, okay. And so went in. He had a monkey on his back, up on his shoulder. He had a monkey. I said, monkey? Where'd you get that monkey? That was highly unethical, being a guy having a monkey on his shoulder. And they'd been down to Guadalcanal, which was way down the South Pacific, and they'd come back with this. They captured that monkey, and the chief had a little old chain on him, and he's sitting up there, and I started to pet him. He said, "Don't pet him, he'll bite you." And this old chief, that was his pet. He got away with putting him up in the locker room at night, and they'd feed him, But anyway, I said, "Where can I sleep on this tugboat?" He said, "Man, don't talk about this ship. This is the greatest ship out here in the Pacific. Oh, come on, give me a break." So he told me to go down the deck, down below. And so I went down this stairwell, and bigger than this, probably about as big as this house right here. This room. They had bunks in there that 60 people could sleep in this. I mean, from just barely off the deck, from up almost to the ceiling. We just barely could get in there and slide into your bunk. And so when I got down there, and I didn't see but one guy, and he had his back to me. And I said, I didn't know who he was. I said, "Hey, are you bunking down here?" And he says, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I'm one of the new 13 people that just came aboard, and where can we sleep?" He said, "Anywhere you want, but all these bunks are available." And there's about 15 or 20 of them available right in that area. So I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "I'm from Texas." And this is this Mexican boy I was telling you about. Oh. And I said, "Texas? That's strange." He said, "What's strange about it?" I said, "Well, I was born in Texas." "You were?" "Yeah." Now, I didn't enlist in Texas. I enlisted in California. Went to boot camp down in San Diego. And he said, "Yep, I came from a little town in Alice, Texas." Never heard of the place. Jerkwater town down there, And so I said, "Well, put her right there." I shook hands with him. He said, "Well, since you're from Texas, I want you to bunk pretty close to me. We'll talk and have a good time." So that's how I met my buddy Gabe Chapa, who is now 84. He's 1 year older than me. And I call him once a week. Every week I call him. Wow. Been doing it for years. I write him letters. And his health's not too good, but he's still kicking. And we served on that ship for 9 months together. And he was on it for 4 years. He was on it about 3 years before I got on it. And talk about a seagoing boat. The Navy don't call them boats, but this was a gunboat, designated gunboat. We could call it a boat. And so now bring you up to speed with how we got in these typhoons. So now with the war ended down in Saipan, which was 125 miles from Guam, and I'd been down there before on the other ship, and the Marines had taken these islands. So the war had progressed all the way to Okinawa, and they won that island over, got that island. So they shipped us up there, and for what reason, I'll never know. And there was 1,100 ships in that harbor. It was a big harbor, kind of like San Francisco Bay.
Wow.
And I thought, now what in the world are we doing up here? The war's over. This is about I think this must have been, it was there, September 1945. And one day, on the 16th, exactly the 16th day of 1945, there was a Jewish boy. His name was Martin Minsky. He was from Brooklyn. Nice kid. He was a radioman. I got acquainted with him. And he jumped out of the conning tower and he says, "Hey, we're going to have to get underway. There's a big typhoon coming our way." And I didn't know what a typhoon was. Never heard of one. So it just came over the Manila radio that we had contact with the Manila down the Philippines. And it was roaring towards Okinawa. Well, here's where I think the Navy made a big boo-boo. And we decided there was 1,100 ships in the harbor, and if they all broke loose at the same time, it'd be mass chaos. So everybody that had any power to go to sea, they'd get out and head for the sea. Well, that was the biggest mistake we ever made in our life. Because that little, I call it a boat, 158 feet, 28 feet wide, just wasn't built for the typhoons. And so here we go, out into the sea, out from the harbor. And I mean, it was picking up. The waves were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so we had all the ammunition that we had from World War II. We carried a lot of ammunition. And all these rockets that they had built rocket launchers for, we had hundreds and hundreds of them things. They probably weighed 5 pounds apiece. And so the skipper, he announced over the PA system, "All hands, topside, we're going to have to start lightening the ship, getting all the load off." So we started passing these, remember the old song, "Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition"? Well, we had one of those. Yeah. And they were down in this hole, and the guy'd pick up a rocket or a projectile or live shells and just hand it to the next guy, and the next guy, and the next guy. And then when it got to the end of the line, he'd just toss it over the ocean. So we were trying to lighten the ship because the ship was going to break into a million pieces, all that weight, they're pounding on him. And here was this boy, Minsky, Martin Minsky, standing like against that bookcase there. And I'm right here. Here's the bulkhead. And he was leaning up against what we call a stanchion pipe. It's just a pipe about, not like that. It stuck right in a hole and it had a chain running through it. And that's all the protection we had. Didn't have a guardrail or anything, just that one chain.
Uh-huh.
Well, he's leaning up against that chain.
Uh-oh.
And I'm looking out of the bow of the ship. And just as I looked, I said, "Oh my God, I can't believe it. Here comes this wave. I have never seen a wave this big in my life." It was just rising up out, just like Pikes Peak coming up.
Oh, man.
And I said, "Holy smokes." And we were going straight into it. Now, if we'd have been sideways, we'd have got capsized and went all drowned. Straight ahead. And then that thing come over. It bounced me right into the bulkhead, and I'm plastered. And I didn't know if I was aboard ship or not, but I could feel the steel behind me, so I thought, well, I was still aboard. And I thought, "Oh, I'm going to drown." That thing, it took It seemed like an eternity to get over us, but it's only about 15 seconds and it's over us.
Yeah.
Well, when it's over, I looked and my buddy was gone. Took him and just wiped him right out to sea. We lost him. And so I ran up to the conning tower, which is what they call the bridge. And I had my friend, he was a navigator, Gabe Chapa. And I says, Gabe, turn the ship around. We got to go get Minsky. We've lost him. And he says, I can't, Gene, unless we get an orders from the captain. Well, the captain was standing there about 3 feet away, and I said, turn the ship around. We got to get Minsky. He said, I'm not turning the ship around. What? You know, I almost had a knockdown drag out right there in the... But he said, no, if we turn this ship around and we get... If another one comes like that, we'll all perish. Well, he was right. So he said, straight ahead. And we could see old Minsky floating out. He had a life jacket on, and
Oh my God.
and of course we radioed. There was another ship coming right behind us. And they said, "Well, we see him. We'll pick him up." Well, we assumed he got picked up. But when the typhoon was over, about 3 days later, we went back into Okinawa, and they had bodies all over the place. You know, they drowned and they floated in, but we never found him. Never found this boy at all. And there's another story that I won't tell. It's too lengthy, but I got to go back to where he lived in Brooklyn, New York, met his father and mother,
Oh, wow.
and got to tell him that I was the last person that saw your son alive. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, what that was a tearjerker.
Yeah, soon after the war.
That was after the war.
Yeah.
And then he used to come to our reunions. We had a reunion every year. We'd go all over. We went to Texas, New Orleans, Atlanta, Georgia, all over the country. So he came and became one of our, we made him an honorary crew member. And that was the only man that we lost on that ship. He got swept overboard.
Wow.
And now that's to bring you up to par when I got sidetracked, or I had to tell you about the ship. Then I go over to visit this guy in Hemet that wrote this book. Kathy and I went over. We found him. Well, first I got his book through like a Barnes & Noble. And I had him to ship me the book. And he had his address in there. Had his phone number.
Wow.
So I called him. I found out, oh, he's only 30 miles away.
Wow.
So I got him on the phone. Told him who I was, and of course, he didn't know me from Joe Smith, you know.
Yeah.
I said, well, I was in this typhoon of September 16th, 1945.
Wow.
And that's what his whole book was based on, that typhoon.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a good book.
Wow.
Ooh, wow. And he put it all in writing, and it's actually a bestseller for a while. So I bought 3 or 4 of these books, and I shipped one to my buddy in Texas, and I gave one to somebody else.
What's the author's name?
Pardon?
What's the author's name of the book?
It's called 6 Days on a Raft.
No.
Yeah, 6 days on a raft. And his ship sunk. And he was out there the same time we were. Well, we didn't see him sink. His ship got capsized, and I have told you a moment ago, we could have been capsized. Well, it turned completely over, and they had 30, I think it was a smaller ship than ours. We had 66 people on our ship. Well, this one was a minesweeper. They only had 36. And they all perished but 6 people. And they got on the life raft and stayed on that life raft
For 6 days.
for 6 bloody days. And that's what this story is all about.
Wow.
6 days on a raft. It's a good story. And so I got his address and phone number right in my pocket. I carry it with me. I've been trying to get a hold of him, and I don't know if he's still alive or not. He was up in years. He'd be pretty close to 90. He was an older man than I am. But I haven't seen him for a couple of years. I've been trying to reach him. But typhoons are mean. Ooh.
Is Gabe still alive? Is
Yeah.
Gabe? He is.
It's a storm, yeah.
Or I'm gonna stop this recording there.
Oh, let me put one more thing and I'll shut up.
Well, I wanna start a new one, start a new recording, so we have them separated.
Okay.
Just gonna take like a break in the